Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. The use of male and female seating areas in Muslim organised meetings in universities is being questioned by a report from Student Rights Pressure Group. The report suggests that segregation on university campuses in meetings of university Islamic societies is rife. Critics of the report say that it exaggerates the issue. They condemn the report for suggesting a link between segregation and extremism. So is separate seating a breach of the 2010 Equality Act, as some say? Or is this just another attempt to demonise Muslim students? Let's take a look at this report.
There has been a lot of media speculation in recent years about the rise of radical Islam on university campuses. Student Islamic societies have often been criticised for hosting speakers who have been accused of being sexist, homophobic or encouraging international terrorism. Now, a report by the pressure group Student Rights has suggested that enforced gender segregation is rife among student Islamic societies. The group monitored 180 events and found that 25% either explicitly promoted segregation by gender or implied that this would be the case. The report has provoked a new wave of revulsion in the media, and headlines have warned of a new generation of radical Islamists preaching at UK universities. Eyebrows have been raised. Some have noted that Student Rights Director Rahim Kassam was a former Director of Communications at the right-wing think tank the Henry Jackson Society, a group which has been accused by many of being Islamophobic. The link between gender segregation and violent extremism can be tenuous. And it has also been suggested that the sample of 180 events is far too small to be considered a representative sample of university Islamic societies.
The ISOC that was accused was Leicester University. Their response was that it wasn't forced setting. But, even if it was forced setting, I don't think anyone would have a problem with it. I think we need to bear in mind and remember that those that are in charge of ISOCs were democratically elected by students, of Muslim students of that same university. And, when it came to probably electing them, issues around segregation would have probably been brought up and they would have been elected on their views on that issue.
I asked Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg whether he was worried about the rise of extremism on university campuses.
I'm afraid I haven't read the report. It's the first time I've heard about it, so I haven't, I'm just not going to comment on a report that I haven't read. But clearly what I want to see on university campuses across the country is a diversity of opinions, strong opinions. Campuses should be places where people argue, where there is passionate argument and dispute, but done in a way which is respectful and is respectful of different people's points of view. That is something that I think all university campuses should aspire towards.
But there's nothing that's beyond the pale at all.
Well, clearly, any activity, this is nothing to do with universities, that is either illegal or an incitement to violence and hatred is of course beyond the pale. But that has nothing to do with university. That is just how we ensure that we have a tolerant and cohesive society in which people are entirely free to express their views, but not to do so in a way which can lead to violence being inflicted on other fellow citizens.
University campuses have always been melting pots for radical speakers and controversial ideas. In 2009, Malcolm Grant, Provost of University College London, sparked a heated debate when, in light of a UCL student, Abdul Matalab's attempt to blow up a US airliner, he vigorously defended the university's right to allow our students to form clubs and societies for all legitimate pursuits and encourage the vigorous debate, disputation and criticism that is central to the very concept of a university. Now, as then, the debate continues to rage. Alex MacDonald, Islam Channel.
Well, with me to discuss these questions are Pete Mercer from the National Union of Students and Omar Ali, President of the Federation of Student Islamic Societies. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Pete, what's your initial reaction to this report? Do you think there's any validity to it?
Well, first of all, I think it's quite worrying that there are two very separate issues here being conflated. On the one hand, claims that there are a number of extremist speakers visiting universities through ISOCs, and on the other, gender segregations. As far as I'm concerned, these are two issues to be dealt with separately. On the first issue, on non-violent extremism, I think what I would say is that actually extremism is actually a highly subjective term. What is extreme to one person is not necessarily extreme to another. And so, in my view, I think this term is being used far too freely and perhaps inconsistently as well. I think if you look at ranges of other types of events that are organised on campuses by students that would be considered to be contentious or controversial, they don't get levels with the same kind of charges. There's no doubt that every once in a while there might be a speaker on a campus that perhaps does verge on hate speech, and it's very difficult for ISOCs and for student unions and for universities to mitigate against that. But that's what we should be trying to do here. We should be genuinely trying to identify where speakers do overstep the mark and border on incitement of hatred, and be dealing with those cases instead of just sort of regarding everything that we perhaps don't like to somehow being extremist. On the matter of gender segregation, again, I find it quite worrying that this is being applied only really to ISOCs, where we know this happens in Jewish communities. There's been Christian Union events where women haven't been allowed to speak, yet we don't see these kind of charges being levelled at them. So I do have to question student rights motives here, whether they actually are trying to create a more safe and more accepting feeling on campuses, or whether actually they're trying to just target a particular group of students and demonise them further.
And your initial response to this report?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been dealing with student rights for a long time. Effectively, their primary focus is on Islamic societies, and almost, I would definitely say, demonizing Islamic societies. And what they definitely don't do is create a safer environment or an informed environment on any campus. What they do is they create almost an atmosphere of fear. And when they, especially for student unions and university management as well, when they receive these reports that are quite shocking on the cover, you could say, when you look deeper, they're extremely flawed. I think there was an article that was released very recently by the ex-editor of the London Student, who picked apart the report and showed that the methodology, the method that was used, was really very, very basic and quite shoddy as well. The whole issue of segregation becoming explicitly linked to extremism is something which we just didn't see coming. It's almost laughable because this has been going on for millennia. This happens in all different, Christian, Jewish societies, and various different aspects of mosques and synagogues and churches. And it's been happening for a very long time. To explicitly link it to extremism is a very strange, but also a conflation of ideas. And we've been very clear on what we think of it. When it comes to hate speech, we've always been against any hate speech. But again, the report is I would say, a very low quality publication, which takes and misquotes different speakers and presents ideas in a particularly subjective way. And it's overall, it hasn't been very helpful, and I don't see it becoming very helpful at all.
Yeah, I think lots of viewers will be struggling to connect the dots in the way that the report does. I mean, what is their argument about the relationship between where you sit in a room and how the room is laid out, and never mind hate speech? I mean, the implication is planting bombs and killing people. Yeah,
it's interesting. This whole thing has never existed before. This whole discourse around gender segregation in a religious event being linked to extremism. But I think it really picked up some traction earlier on in the year when there was an event at UCL. And I think it was Dawkins tweeted saying that this was sexual apartheid, and that this, that a head should roll at the university, and it became quite a dramatic fiasco at the time. And since that time, it's kind of gained more and more traction, and obviously student rights have jumped on board with this whole idea of segregation being almost oppressive, or they're basically the whole argument is being framed under this being an act of discrimination, and clearly it's not. It's an act of religious manifestation of trying to come close to God, and there are particular etiquettes that Islamic societies choose, democratically elected Islamic societies choose to implement within their own events.
Yeah, Pete, I mean, because what do you think of the use of the language here? Because segregation, if you say the word segregation in this kind of context, the images that are brought to mind are either the Deep South before the Civil Rights Movement in America, or apartheid South Africa, where the state is legally obliging certain sections of the population to be separate from others. This is a very different case to where a particular civil society group decide to behave in one way rather than another.
Absolutely. I mean, in my view, the word segregated is loaded because it implies that this is something that is being enforced upon individuals. And I think the key distinction we have to make here is enforced gender segregation and self-organising, which is something that we would always say is up to the agency of those that are organising. Now, you know, there is an argument to be made that perhaps there will some people that won't feel as though they can dissent in a room, but that's quite frankly not for us to judge. This is a matter of agency, and I find it quite worrying that essentially some white Christians are imposing their moralistic view upon a group of other people, which to me is just sort of neo-imperialism. Because I mean, I'm going to lay it on the table. I personally don't believe in gender segregation in a political environment, but that's just my view, and that's from my own personal moral subjectivity. So it's not my right to impose that upon another group of students, and nor is it the right of student rights either.
The guy who wrote the report was a Muslim. Would you expect them to know more about these are debated issues within the Muslim community? It's not true that all Islamic Society meetings will be segregated like this. There are different opinions. So do you think that perhaps that level of debate and the ability of people inside those meetings, women inside those meetings, to say, oh, well, we don't want to be segregated, that could or has been a matter of debate?
Well, I think, like you said, Islamic societies are very different, and they will segregate in different ways, or they will not segregate at all. And there is a, you know, as I said, Islamic societies are democratically elected. There is a way for people to input into the Islamic Society, and at the end of the day, they're organising their events for their membership, you could say. And it's almost ironic for others to come in and say, well, this is an act of discrimination, or this the kind of thing shouldn't be allowed. With regards to student rights, yes, it's true that there is someone who's the head of student rights who you could say is from the Muslim faith. And I would say that he most certainly does know that, you know, segregation or gender segregation or separate seating or different areas, whatever it may be, has existed for a very, very long time. And I think that it would be very insincere for them to say that this is not a genuine and you know, an almost a genuine religious manifestation from Muslim communities as well as any other community, which I'm sure they would never focus on anyway. But I think if you look further into what student rights is and who they are and who they're linked to, you kind of see a more sinister agenda, you know, that's taking place as well.
Do you think a more sensible way of looking at this would be, say, to make a comparison with different schools of Christian thought? You know, if you go to a Quaker meeting, it's expected that lay members of the congregation will stand up and testify. That's the form that the service takes. If you were to go along to a Catholic church and do the same thing in the middle of Mass, you'd probably get kicked out of the church. It certainly wouldn't be accepted as an acceptable way to behave in a Catholic Christian setting. So do you think that really what we're talking about and really what these people have seized on in the report is simply that there are different patterns and understandings of worship in different sections of the Muslim faith?
Yeah, I think there are different patterns. I would say that even though there are differences, I don't think this is a discussion, and I think we've kind of tried to make it very clear. This is not a discussion about the different opinions that exist within the Muslim community and discussing which one is more commendable, whether it's this type of segregation or that type of separate seating, or whether it's not. Or rather, it's just about people being able to manifest their religion, to practice their religion in a way which they deem fit, and a way which democratically elected Islamic societies seem fit to serve their membership. So it shouldn't be a debate about what type of segregation, what type of separate seating, whether it's neither there or here. Rather, we need to just focus on this is a right. This has nothing to do with discrimination, and this is all about an Islamic society or Muslim students trying to come close to God in what they believe is correct.
Pete, do you think there's an element of hypocrisy here about, I mean, you've touched on it already about the way in which different religions are treated. I mean, you know, we have decisions in various parts of the Christian church about not allowing women to hold certain posts in it. people may have an opinion about whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, but nobody suggests that it's a kind of danger to the wider society. Neither do they suggest that it isn't actually up to the church themselves to decide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's enormously inconsistent. You know, I don't think other religions come under the same kind of scrutiny as Islam in general society. And I think we need to also look at the real impact that these kind of reports and these statements are having on campuses. So in the last few weeks, there's been a rise of students wanting to set up students against Islam societies. Now, couldn't that be argued that that is a form of extremism, you know, depending from, you know, which perspective you're sitting? I think we need to stop pretending that extremism is something that is restricted to Islam as a faith, and we need to stop pretending that extremism is restricted to faith in general as well. You know, I'd also like to point out the lack of legitimacy of student rights as an organisation. They claim to be the defender of students' rights and liberties on campuses, yet I have no idea who they represent. They're not a membership organisation. I don't know on whose behalf they are speaking on. So who are they and why are they making these kind of claims? Yeah, you know, and even from just a practical point of view, I find it very disingenuous that they're going around claiming to want to make campuses safer, because actually, if we do genuinely have a problem with non-violent extremism on campuses, however large or small that is, you don't deal with that by ostracising further and targeting a group of students that are already particularly and disproportionately targeted. What you do, how you respond to that, is you have an open dialogue and an open conversation with them and go through a series of processes to make sure that other people's rights aren't being infringed upon whenever any events are being organised. So I think it's enormously disingenuous to say that they are coming from this from a benevolent student rights perspective.
Are you aware of the kind of thing that Pete's suggesting here of a rise of intolerance from the kind of political right on campus about Muslims?
Yeah, I think this is a really the point that I made right at the beginning. This has nothing to do with protecting the rights of students on campus or anything of the sort. It's really creating an environment of fear, an environment of Islamophobia. And it's not good for society. It's not good for any campus, and it's not good for for our nation at large. These type of reports and this type of constant pushing of a particular narrative around Muslim students as being extremists, or as being, every single Muslim student is a potential terrorist, or even now, the way that they arrange their seating is explicitly linked to extremism. All of this stuff is very, very negative. And we've at the Federation of Student Islamic Societies at FOSIS, we've held mature discussions around extremism on campus. And not too long ago, we held an event at the House of Lords, and we discussed the way that Muslim students are, number one, represented in the media, and number two, the issue of extremism. And there are people who continually come out and say that Muslim students are linked to X, Y, and Z form of extremism. But from our research, from different experts from universities UK to the NUS to people who are working in interfaith on campus, saying the same thing, that there is no evidence to suggest that extremism is in some form of pandemic on campus. It's no more prone to extremism than any other part of society. And that the best way to engage with Muslim students is mainstream Islamic activity, the type of stuff that FOSIS does, that Islamic Society do, that charity work, the prayers that they get together, the events that they do. This mainstream type of work is the best way to engage with Muslim students. And if you continually attack the mainstream, all you do is you push people to the fringes, and that's counterproductive for anyone.
Pete, if students are on campus and these things are happening, that you suggest that perhaps there's a growth in Islamophobic ideas as a result of reports like this, or just because the press builds this up over sort of day after day, week after week, what is NUS trying to do about this?
Sure. Well, we've been working quite closely with FOSIS, the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, represented here by Omar, quite closely in the last couple of years, as well as other faith groups and other student groups in general, so LGBT societies, JSOCs, Jewish student societies. What we're trying to do at the moment is trying to embed a culture of dialogue on campuses. This isn't always about shutting events down, as students' rights would perhaps like to see. This is about having an open conversation about what we deem to be acceptable levels of speech. You know, just because something is controversial or just because somebody doesn't like what somebody's going to say, that doesn't mean we should ban it. Of course, we should try and make students safe on campus, and there's always going to be a difficult balance between balancing the freedom of speech on the one hand and the freedom of individual safety on the other. But we want to try and promote dialogue as much as possible, not just outright ban it. And so we've been running a number of different projects. Most recently, we ran a project called the Dialogue Project in further education, actually, not in higher education, which promoted the dialogue between LGBT, that is, lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans students, and those of faith. And also the I Will project as well, which has looked at empowering Muslim women within an educational environment. And that's not about saying we think you're oppressed and we're trying to liberate you somehow. It's about saying how can we allow you to develop your own agency, just as though we would any other underrepresented group in society.
And how much do you blame the media for this? Because any group of people can get together, do a study like this, issue the findings, but it's up to the press to decide how serious a report is, whether or not the research has actually been done in it, whether or not its findings are worthy of being publicised. So that's where it switches over into something which is having an impact, isn't it, with the press reporting?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I mean, going back to how could say shoddy the report is. Student Rights didn't attend most of the events that they spoke about. I think Student Rights also have previously published an article or a post on their website about me attending a particular event which I never attended. So they're just really off the mark in many regards. And when the press takes this up in a very reactionary...
So you're suggesting that really what's happening here is that the research is about as deep as a Google search.
Yeah, I would say that it's as much as a searching Facebook and Google and maybe going through Twitter, different Twitter accounts. It's very low quality, and for the press to come out and there was a few articles that came out. There was the Times, the Telegraph picked it up, the Sun as well. For them to come out without even doing proper research into what is this report all about, and simply publishing the findings in the same narrative that that Student Rights have published their report, it's problematic. But with the media, that's an ongoing problem that Muslims and in particular Muslim students face every week. The constant negative reports, and for us, what we try to do the most is to showcase the great work that Islamic societies and Muslim students do, because they are really at the forefront on many campuses for doing the most fantastic work, whether it's the best charity work or whether it's being recognised as the best society on campus. I mean, there's just so many fantastic stuff. But at the same time, Islamic societies are political as well, and they have the right to be political. And I think that's something to be commended and not condemned.
Pete, on the role of the press, do you locate a lot of the blame in the publicity that's given to the report rather than the report itself, or as much as the report itself?
I mean, I think the report is partly to blame for some of the pretty sad sort of narratives that we're starting to see on campus. A piece of research that we did about 2 years ago showed that 1 in 7 Muslim students had been subject to a hate crime, and that's on campus, not off campus. So that's quite worrying. But I think in general society, I think our right-wing press is largely to blame for what is sadly growing as Islamophobia and certainly not declining. Even in the Leveson inquiry, it was shown that there is certainly a consistent treatment of religious and ethnic minority groups by our tabloid papers, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed and regulated.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there because that's all we've got time for in the first part of the programme, but do rejoin us for the second part. We'll be looking at the government's plans for the probation service in part 2 of the Politics and Media programme.